Hello, I'm Irwin Stelzer, Director of Economic Policy Studies at the Hudson Institute. And I wanted to spend a minute with you talking about Europe, because it seems that we are all Europeans now. I generally work out in the morning at 6 o'clock and watch CNBC. I did that this morning and I couldn't get a shred of news about what's going on in America. It was all about Europe. So we are concerned about Europe, and the question is why? Well, the first reason is that there is a crisis of confidence in the United States for domestic political reasons. And depending on your partisan persuasion, you can blame whoever you want. But there is no question that there's a feeling that the political process isn't working, and that's feeding over into business and consumer sentiment. Once you start with that shaky foundation, bad news then becomes relevant to people because they're picking up every shred of bad news. And in terms of producing bad news, Europe is really right up there with the very best at the moment. The situation now is this. If Greece doesn't get a few bucks, I think something like 8 billion euros, soon they won't be able to meet their payroll. Well, they'll get that. The IMF and the parties involved in lending the money will troop over there, and they'll come up with the money in return for various concessions of austerity that the Greeks have made. That's not the problem. Then there's the longer-term problem. Greece can't pay its debts. Well, that's easily fixed. They default. In other words, they negotiate a lower payment schedule or a longer payment schedule, and that can be done. Now, that's very difficult to do since people up north in Europe, like the Germans, are pretty cranky about seeming to support the lifestyles of Greeks who they imagine spend their time on the beaches while the Germans are working, beavering away in factories. The Germans don't like that. But Angela Merkel, the chancellor, will be able to pull it off. Between the opposition parties and her own party, she'll be able to get some limited long-term funding for Greece. That probably won't be enough because when Greece goes down, a lot of the banks in Germany and France will go down with it, and they will need to be what is called recapitalized, which will either be at the expense of the taxpayer or they will try to raise capital in the private market. Okay, let's assume that's all done. We're now finished with recapitalizing the banks. Everything is cooking along, and now the problem occurs. The problem is that large economies in Europe, Spain, Italy, Greece, are not competitive in world economies. Think about it. Italians were producing shoes and fabrics. They're producing things that the Chinese produce, not things that the Chinese buy. The Germans produce things that the Chinese buy, sophisticated machinery, things like that. Now, that's not the whole story, but that's a good handle for yourself to decide which economies can compete and which can't. The ones that can't have essentially products that are now globalized and which their labor costs are too high. So the real question is going to be, can Greece, can Spain, can Italy reduce their labor costs enough, and that means reduce their real wages, to become competitive, or alternatively, will Northern Europe perpetually finance their deficits? We don't know the answer yet, but at least I thought I would like you to think about the problem.